Howdy, I'm Jammer. So, fun fact, I actually recorded this video, or today's video, once already. And then I looked over it, and I promptly deleted it. And the reason I did that was because, well, it sucked. And I know what some of my regular viewers are thinking, dude, you've already addressed that you suffer from clinical depression and you have self-esteem issues, so naturally, of course you're going to think whatever you made sucked. Like, get over yourself, dude, get on. And to be fair, 9 times out of 10, I would accept that criticism because I am ruthlessly cruel to myself, especially when it comes to things that I make, whether it be these YouTube videos, my paintings, my drawings, what have you. But maybe it's getting older, or maybe it's just because the routine of these is enough. I've figured out what my rhythms are, and one of the great things about stuff like that is after a while, you begin to be able to determine what is crap and what is actually good. And watching the video, I realized what I made was crap because I didn't say anything. Or really, I was trying to say too much. And the reason for that is because I have a heavy bias. Today's book is the graphic novel, there we go already, graphic novel Pablo by Julie Bermont and Clement, and I'm going to be completely honest, I have no idea how to pronounce that last name. I took Spanish in high school, not French. My family's from Louisiana. I should know French, alas I don't. Nevertheless, I was attempting to do this graphic novel here, and like I said a second ago, I had a problem because, well, I'm biased. I love Picasso. One of the prize books of my collection is this book right here, The Ultimate Picasso. It is literally a collection of paintings, sketchings, drawings, ceramics, sculptures, what have you, that Picasso made over the course of his lifetime. And fun fact, Picasso died at the age of 98, and during the course of his lifetime managed to produce somewhere around 55,000 works. And they say works because, as that short list that I just gave you a second ago notes, he made a lot and not just paintings. Picasso has been a real influence upon me, both in terms of myself as an artist and then just in terms of my desire to create and make things. I just enjoy it. It is my passion in life, and if I'm lucky, at some point people will begin to actually pay me for it, because to date I still have 0 patrons on Patreon, but you can fix that. Just go to the description section below. $1 a month, just saying. Anyway, I love Picasso. He's very much one of the artists who has shaped me and the development of my own personal visual style. And so naturally, I'm talking about a comic about Pablo Picasso. Like, 2 of my favorite things of all time in one book. It doesn't get better than that. But the problem there is sometimes bias, as well as my own desire to make these great, can result in crap. And I didn't want it to be because I really, really liked this book, and I really thought you would like this book as well. Or at the very least, you might find it an interesting opportunity to, again, further explore what comics are. And if I can just sort of make one more point before I get into sort of the next section, as always, is the goal of this channel, if there is anything in terms of like a creative goal, is not to talk about everything I read. Because I struggle with that. Sometimes when I'm reading a book, I'm like, how the hell am I going to talk about this on my channel? And then I realize, or I remember, oh yeah, just because I'm reading a book doesn't mean I have to do a video about it. Because there's plenty of books that I've read that I never talk about on this channel. Because, well, they're crap. Or they're just okay. Or they're forgettable. Or at the very least, they don't really contribute anything to what a comic book can and should be, in my opinion. Comics are an art form. That's what this channel is really about. And it's about exploring the art form of comics and using a couple of great examples that I've read to sort of further that idea and hopefully maybe inspire somebody else to also explore comics, not necessarily just as something fun and entertaining to read, but ultimately as art. And I mean, come on, a graphic novel about probably the most influential painter of the 20th century. You have art about art. It doesn't get more meta than this. So seriously, already, I'm telling you now, Pablo is great. And on the note of that, today's video is going to be a little different than what we're usually accustomed to, but I'll let the next section do the work for me today. So, Just a reminder, today, this video is about Pablo, again, by Julie Bermont and Clement. Last name, I cannot say aloud. If you're watching this video, please forgive me. I think you're an amazing artist and you did a fantastic job. I just don't want to butcher your last name, so please forgive me. But yes, let's get into Pablo and why I think you should care about Pablo. All right, before we actually continue with Picasso, I just wanted to actually point something out. I promise I did not intend this to happen, but I was looking over the stack of books that I intend to do videos for, and I recently finished Volume 1 of Sinestro by Cullen Bunn. You'll note he is a Yellow Lantern. And what other book do I intend to cover at some point in the future? But Sin City, That Yellow Bastard by Frank Miller. I mean, okay, technically Sinestro is kind of like pink, purple, magenta, so he's not really yellow, but he's kind of yellow, and he's definitely a bastard. And I'm sorry, just the serendipity of these two being in the same stack at the same time, it's just chef's kiss. Wonderful. Okay, now, back to Pablo. Now, I said this video is going to be a little different than usual, and really it's because of my failure yesterday today's video is really going to be the way it is. Normally, these videos break down to me babbling about in the introduction, then kind of babbling through what the narrative of a story is, and then hopping into the formal elements and then doing the last hurrah. I'm kind of going to do something different today and kind of skip over the narrative and focus mostly on the formal aspects of the graphic novel Pablo, because Pablo is a biography. I'm going to tell you at least a little bit about what the book is about, but when we talk about Pablo as a book, we're talking about the life and history of Pablo Picasso. And here's the thing, like, you can read biographies about Pablo and learn about the life of Pablo Picasso. Or you could go to the Wikipedia entry for Pablo Picasso and read a bit about his life. And fun fact, I'm going to include the Wikipedia entry in the description section below because, one, Wikipedia is really not that bad. It's only bad if you copy and paste from Wikipedia instead of writing your paper like you were supposed to do. And also because, most importantly, in the bottom section, there's a reference section filled with links to articles, essays, newspaper writings, magazine articles, as well as lists of books that people have used to write those essays on Wikipedia. Go there and check out all the amazing cool books and essays and articles that have been written about Picasso to learn about his life. So, when we're talking about the narrative of this book here, Pablo, there's a lot of details and facts and information. And in fact, that's probably one of the things I love about this book is because the possibility to just sort of do a general overview of the life of Pablo was really abandoned in this to tell a really solid life story about Pablo Picasso, but then at the same time to tell the story of one of his muses, former lovers, and regular poser, and I promise not like a fake person, just a woman who would pose for him, Fernande Olivier. This book, while centering mostly upon Pablo Picasso, is largely told through the perspective of Fernande Olivier. It actually begins with Fernande as an older woman, sort of walking about, being ignored by people in the crowd, and observing that, you know, she starred or appeared in well over 100 of Pablo Picasso's paintings, etchings, and drawings. Most people on the street would probably recognize the name Picasso. He's just become synonymous with art in our culture. And yet if you asked somebody named Fernande Olivier, or if you asked somebody who was Fernande Olivier, they probably wouldn't be able to tell you. And so one of the interesting things about this book is as much as it is about the biography of the painter Pablo Picasso, it's also very much about the woman who was there as Picasso was beginning to establish himself as an artist. And that's another key important point here. This is not an entire biography of Pablo Picasso. Despite the thickness of the book, this book actually only focuses on about 4, maybe 5 years of Picasso's life, covering his blue period, his rose period, and then eventually his development into the genre style of Cubism. Now, if you don't know what any of those things are, don't worry about it. Again, go to Wikipedia, check it out, they'll give you all the details there. The only thing you really need to know about is the blue period. He painted a lot of paintings that were blue. Rose period, there was lots of red. And then with Cubism, things were very blocky. But I'll get into that a little bit. as I now move away from what is the narrative of this book to talk about why I think this book is really important from a formal level. Because again, this is a biography about a visual artist. And fun fact, this is actually part of a series. The publisher Self-Made Hero has actually done several biographies about noted visual artists. I hate when I do white up against the screen here, and you'll see you see how the colors shift. I suck at making videos. But you know what? You're here to laugh at me and maybe learn something. So it doesn't matter if I'm pretty, you know? Tell you what, just tape a picture of Jennifer Lawrence or something to the cell phone. You know what? Jennifer Lawrence with my voice sounds absolutely horrifying. I'm not going to do that to Jennifer. I think she's awesome. So, when we're talking about this book, we have to recognize it's also part of a series by the publisher Self-Made Hero. They've actually done several books. One about Jean-Michel Basquiat, another about Yayoi Kusama, Vincent van Gogh, one about Salvador Dali, and then I believe they've done one about Degas and maybe Edvard Munch, but don't quote me on the last one. But the point is that this has been an attempt by a publisher to tell the life stories of visual artists through probably one of the most recognizable and, in my opinion, arguably accessible visual mediums of all time. So when we're looking at this, we have to understand that the effort of this book is to tell the story of who Picasso was as a human being, what were the events of his life, what were his qualities as a human being, what were his foibles, what were his weaknesses, what have you. The point is, we're going to try to come away with an idea of who was Pablo Picasso before he eventually, quote, became Picasso, the grand visual artist, who kind of just defined art for an entire generation, if not a century or more. So one of the things that's interesting to me about this book is, one, the sort of framing narrative of Fernand sort of remembering the events of Picasso's life, but then also the way that memory can kind of create these interesting moments. There was a period in Pablo Picasso's early career, like I said, known as the Blue Period. And I'm probably going to be bouncing forth between this book, graphic novel, and then this book here. But I'm just going to pull up probably one of the most recognizable paintings of Picasso's Blue Period, The Old Man. Let's see, what's the official title? Oh, excuse me, The Old Guitarist. This painting is still available today at the Chicago Museum of Art. Well, available, you can look at it at the Chicago Museum of Art. And you can probably tell already, despite the fact that my light bulbs are being a dick and casting lights on the page, this is a beautiful painting. But the thing you really need to recognize is it's blue. And in our culture, blue is often sort of synonymous with sadness and moroseness. I mean, we have an entire musical genre called the blues, which is typically about people singing about tragedies. So what exactly was the tragedy in Picasso's life that spurred this? Well, in particular, you'll observe this man here in this particular painting. This painting, which, let's see, the title for that one, of course, is 133, which is La Vie. And the young man who focuses in this painting is really important. He was a man by the name of Casagemas, who is a compatriot of Picasso's. He was one of Picasso's friends when he had just moved to the city of Paris. And while they were there, they did what young men tended to do. They raised hell, and they saw a lot of girls. And sometimes what happens when young straight men interact with women, Casagemas fell in love with a young woman. And also sometimes what can happen when, young men interact with girls is sometimes the girls don't like you back. Now, you or me, it would go, okay, whatever. I'll just go to Tinder, swipe right on somebody, and maybe I'll get lucky. Casagemas didn't take it that way, and in fact, in a scene that is presented here in the book, he held a dramatic dinner after he had proposed to this woman that he fell in love with, and then shot her and killed himself. It was a tragic event. It impacted Picasso immensely, both in terms of his own humanity as well as his visual style. And when we look at this book, one of the things that I really like about Bermont and Bermont and, I'm not going to say the name because I can't do it, is they create Picasso's discovery that his friend Casagemas has been shot. But you'll note one very important thing. First, we see Picasso interacting with his group of friends, discovering the news that Casagemas has killed himself. And what's important here is look at the frames itself. We have a pretty standard 6-panel page. It's not a lot of inventiveness. But then when we go to the next page, we actually see the scene of Casahemas killing himself and then attempting to shoot his lover at the time. But that square panel has altered. And the reason for that is simple. Most people would be able to guess it. Picasso is visualizing the scene of his friend's death as it's being narrated to him. And it may not seem terribly important, but we have to remember again, this could just as easily have been 6 square and or rectangular just 6 squares or rectangles set onto a page filled with images telling the story. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that, and there's plenty of examples of comics using that. And you'll see there is some visual play here as some panels are a little bit longer than others. But again, choosing to do just that little curvy line is again a nice little reminder that formally comics can work by presenting information in ways that aren't as direct as we would see, say, in just an image or in just words. By sort of creating these curvy panel shapes, the artists are attempting to mimic the act of daydreaming or imagining a set of circumstances. And everybody recognizes that there's a kind of sensation to daydreaming. It's not necessarily a concrete reality in our minds. We can feel it, or as Fry from Futurama put it so beautifully, it's like a headache with words. Or excuse me, a headache with pictures. What we have here is a nice, subtle tool to convey the information while also rhetorically continuing the story of reminding ourselves, oh, this isn't just a flashback, this is Picasso imagining his friend dying. And that in turn caused him to imagine most of the blue period that would kind of dominate his work for months, if not years. Now, I noted before, this book is told from the perspective of Fernand Olivier, one of Picasso's former lovers. And one of the things that's interesting to me about this book is that, on the one hand, this can kind of flesh out the events of Picasso's life that we may not have normally had if we just focused on him. But also, too, it brings to question, or really reminds the reader of something that's come to light a lot more recently. Picasso was kind of a dick. There's no second part. It's just, yeah, Picasso was kind of a dick. Okay, we'll clarify. One of the things that was extraordinarily troublesome about Picasso is the way he treated women. And the way he treated women was typically objects. He would use them as a way to kind of enhance or push the creative direction of his art, and he was incredibly chauvinistic, oftentimes treating the women in his life incredibly cruelly, using them up until he was eventually bored or couldn't get anything else out of them, and then would eventually move on to other women. He tended to be extraordinarily psychologically abusive and cruel, and plenty of biographies have pointed this out, and there's more and more conversations in the history of the art world and just art period about why this is important to talk about. So if we look at one passage in particular, we see Fernand and Pablo after they have had sex. You'll note again a nice little clean 6-panel page. Nothing terribly inventive about it, but again, by looking at the figures within these panels, observing their body language and then observing the content as well, you'll see that Picasso is just staring at Fernand, and he's noting that at last, you are mine, woman, and Fernand is resisting him. And then if you look over here to this page, we have this gorgeous, I wouldn't even call it a half-page panel, because it's really more just like 70% of the page in total. We see Picasso laid completely bare, surrounded by his art, declaring to Fernand that she is his, that no woman of Picasso's is going to work for a living, and Fernand is, at the same time, thinking to herself, oh my God, this guy is so full of himself. Okay, so formally then, what is taking place? Again, this is an attempt to show off one of the foibles or flaws of Picasso as a human being. He had a tendency to be misogynistic and cruel and really possessive of the women in his life, manipulating them and controlling them as much as he possibly could. And then in this large sort of half-page panel, we see Fernand just kind of observing him completely bare. Again, leaving him in just like a little blanket. Picasso often tended to paint, usually just shirtless or with maybe 1 or 2 articles of clothing on. So it really wouldn't be that surprising that he would be almost naked in his studio. But at the same time, it's a nice effect of, by placing his naked, almost naked body in a room full of paintings and creating a sense of space, Fernand is really able to kind of perceive one of Picasso's fatal weaknesses, which is ultimately his desire to control everything around him and how she was kind of repulsed by it. Again, by using that nice big page spread, the authors are able to create that perception of Fernand on Picasso. You might be able to achieve that, and again, one of those nice little 6-panel pages, but by taking the time and effort to do a full panel or a half panel page, you capture that sort of essence of Fernand's rejection of Picasso in that moment. Now, moving on a little further, one of the things I want to talk about in this book is, one, Pablo is really good, or an amazing book in terms of the full page panel spread. There's page after page, example after example of this book of just gorgeous, lush illustrations that give you a real sense of place and presence. Again, Pablo Picasso was living in Paris in the early years of the 1900s. That was a space, that was a world into itself. And since this is a biography, their effort is to try to create that space, to recreate it. Not simply just for the fact of, hey, showing off all the really cool, pretty, buildings in Paris that we can draw, but also to really show Pablo existing in Paris, a realm and a city that, especially at that time, was a realm for the bohemians. It was a realm for artists. People were coming there to become inspired, to become painters, to interact with people that had established themselves in the pantheons of high art. Picasso is living there, and at the same time he is living there, he's also encountering things like circuses, street performers, poets, what have you. And so a page like this, while on the one hand can be a way of showing off the action and the energy of the circus that would influence Picasso's Rose period so much, it's also very much about kind of capturing the energy of Paris in this particular time period. And on that same note, there's a later period where they go to the Champ de Mars. It was basically a huge art show. And one of the most important elements in the life of Picasso is his relationship with the other painter, Henri Matisse. Now, you've probably heard Matisse in some form or capacity. I guarantee you've probably seen one of his paintings before. If nothing else, you probably recognize the gouache paper cutouts that he did at the tail end of his life. During the early years of his life, Matisse really pioneered a field of art known as Fauvism. It was a period marked for dramatic colors. And I recognize we're all living in postmodern art periods, so bright, colorful colors is nothing really new. I mean, we're all post-Jackson Pollock, for God's sakes. But we have to remember that up to this time period, that wasn't the art scene. And in fact, in some instances, people could get really, really passionate. There were a lot of people who didn't like the Fauvists. They didn't just not like them, they thought they were almost blasphemous because they weren't doing history paintings or landscapes or still lifes. They were just painting with all these bright colors, taking literally close to 1,000 years of the European art tradition and just throwing it away. So it's easy for us, again, in an age of post-Andy Warhol, post-Jackson Pollock, to think, what do we care if he paints a woman, but he uses bright yellow for her hair and then a deep blue for her face? Because nobody had really done it. And so this scene, I think, is really great for showing, again, using the formal elements of, again, the half-page spread, but then also sort of using the particular aesthetic styles and these motions and gestures in order to convey the information that Pablo was receiving. Now, one of the other things about this book, there's only 2 more clips and then I promise we're done because we're hitting close to 20 minutes and holy crap. One of the things that's sort of a continual reference throughout this book is Pablo Picasso's eyes. And just about every biography that I've ever read of Picasso and just about every documentary I've seen of Picasso pointed out that Picasso's strongest quality was his eyes. He was able to just see things. And so sort of near the tail end of the book, as he's beginning to discover the African tribal masks that were making their way to Paris at this time, is that Picasso was constantly looking around him. Now note, this is presented here as kind of very dramatic and also kind of a way to sort of show that Fernand was a little bothered, actually no, very bothered by certain personality traits of Picasso. But nevertheless, his eyes being a key element to the book itself is a keen reminder about what Picasso's strength actually was. one of the things I mentioned a minute ago was that when I tried to do this video, I tried to talk so much about Picasso because his visual style is just tremendous, and his skill at art was oftentimes really underappreciated. But one of the things that was great about Picasso is he practiced his craft, and more importantly, he observed. Oftentimes, great artists seem like these kind of like monomythic figures who just appear from the haze, completely talented, amazing, wonderful. And that's bullshit. Because any visual artist will tell you it takes years, decades to achieve something that feels intimately personal. Picasso is once so fondly saying, "It took me 4 years to learn to paint like Raphael. It took me a lifetime to paint like a child." That's a quote that hasn't really been authenticated as much as it really should have. And by the way, there's a great YouTube channel called The Canvas. I'm going to post a link in the description section below. He actually explores that quote really well. I don't know the name of the host. I'm so sorry, dude. If you actually watch this one day, hi, how's it going? I love your channel so much. Observation is key to the artist's success, because it's only by observing the world around you that you're able to eventually then begin to try to translate it onto the page, onto the canvas, into the clay, whatever your medium actually is. Picasso was first and foremost an observer. He looked around the world, he looked at art, he looked at everything and brought that into his work, because that's what an artist has to do. And then you paint, or you draw, or you sing, or you make music, or whatever you do to make art. You practice it. You look, and then you make. And that's one of the things, it doesn't seem terribly important, or it doesn't seem terribly revolutionary when you look at that page, but again, it's a nice reminder again that Picasso was an observer, and that was really, more than anything else, the key to his success as an artist, after his ability to continually dedicate time and energy to his craft. Now, there's one last page in the book that I'm going to talk about, and then I promise we'll call it a day here, because I know you're getting tired of me. Just think of Jennifer Lawrence again, you know. Or don't. Maybe you're a Mila Kunis fan. You know, you might be into that. Or, you know what? Whatever you're into, do it, rock it, be it. Anyway, in terms of the career of Picasso, I noted that this book focuses on about a period somewhere between like 4 to 5 years, that ends right before he sort of began his push into the realm of Cubism, which really established him as an artist. Now, there's one painting everybody talks about it, and any longtime lovers of Picasso probably know exactly what painting I'm going to talk about now. The title of it is Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. Again, I didn't take French, I took Spanish. Please forgive me. But this is the painting here. And I guarantee you, if you've ever had an art history course in college, or if you've ever even just casually looked through a general art history book, you've probably seen this painting before. And the reason for that is simple. This painting, probably more than just about anything else, really helped establish and create what we now sort of collectively refer to as modern art. And it doesn't necessarily seem like this would be so much of a profound thing. But if I can just sort of contextualize it, you saw a minute ago what Picasso had done during the Blue period. If you take a look here, these works were done when Picasso was a child. And you can see immediately the profound difference. There's a concern for light. There's a concern for values, textures. There's a careful concern for the realistic portrayal of the way that fabric folds and the different colors that can create that illusion. The sense of space. You get a real sort of three-dimensional presence of these figures and objects. If we look again to Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, the contrast is clear. Pablo Picasso had dedicated his youth learning the traditional styles of what was known as academic painting. And honestly, if you want to know more about that, there are dozens of amazing art history podcasts and art history channels here on YouTube that you can check out that will give you a much better description than I ever could. But what's important here when we talk about this book, Pablo, is we ultimately see Pablo painting that painting. But what is unique is the fact that when that painting was originally premiered, not a lot of people really liked it. And in fact, Pablo Picasso honestly thought that he had failed with that painting, and it spent most of its time rolled up and hiding in a corner of his studio. Which, again, fun fact, when you talk about canvases, it's really just a piece of cloth tacked onto a piece of wood. And so, or at least a wooden frame. So it's an odd period where we're like, wait, rolled up? Paintings don't roll. But actually they do. We only are just familiar with them because whenever we go to a museum, they're always tacked onto the board. Anyway, Picasso thought the painting wasn't that great or that he had failed, and a lot of people around him didn't think that it was a good painting. So much so that one of the most brilliant full-page panels in this book, to my mind, is this one here. And probably, to my mind, one of the things that really sells this graphic novel, because all of these figures, whether it be Fernand or Henri Matisse, or even people in his immediate social circle, they are recreated as the brothel workers in the painting. And at that moment, as the brothel workers have constantly been observed, they're sort of judging the viewer. They're kind of looking at them and assessing them, kind of in terms of a critique, which nobody had really seen before. Right here, we are using the figures of Les Demoiselles, in the case of Pablo's friends, just as much critiquing his ability as an artist and ultimately his long-term success as one. It doesn't seem like much, but again, by effectively using the full-page panel and recreating the actual painting that Pablo had made himself, it's a nice, successful way of conveying to a reader rhetorically Pablo's perception of failure. If we look at the formalistic aspects of Pablo, to my mind, one of the things that's so amazing and so incredible is just the wealth of information that they're able to convey, not simply through the conveyance of facts, but also simply through just scene after scene after scene. And in fact, I didn't even show the reader all of the interesting illusions that are carried off in this book. There are pages and spreads and moments that are just gorgeous to look at. And honestly and truthfully, I'll take this book off the shelf sometimes, open it at random, and observe just small little trinkets, tiny moments that I can see these artists, again, playing with the form of comics to convey the information, the moods, the feelings, the dreams that was the artist Pablo Picasso and the life he lived in the brief amount of time between the years of about 1903 to 1907. Again, this is a biography. It's a biography about a short period of time, but it's a biography about Pablo as well as Fernand that's attempting to sort of get at the legacy of Picasso, but more importantly, remind the reader that Picasso, at one point, before he became the Grand Master and basically the face of modern art, he was still very much a young man who was full of doubts, who didn't know what his legacy was going to be, but had an idea of what he wanted it to be. And at the same time, there was a young woman who was constantly being manipulated by men around her, and unfortunately became manipulated and often, ultimately, dropped by this man who was supposedly so great and held in such high esteem. It's not necessarily a flattering portrayal of Picasso, but it doesn't have to be. Biographies are great when they show people for their complete and true selves. Denying that Picasso was a dick to the women and the people in his life would be a disservice to the life of the man himself and be a disservice to the genre of biographies. And when we look at this book formally as a comic, it's truly great to observe how much the form of comics contributes to being able to convey all of this information to the reader. And so, let's do the last hurrah, and then call it a day. Okay, I had to do this one again, but because I also just kind of realized that at the same time I'm doing a book about a sort of beloved figure who in real life was kind of a dick, while also, holding up a book by a supposedly beloved figure who's also kind of a dick. These are facts. Anyway, Pablo, again, by Julie Bermont and Clement. One more time, I'm not going to say it, but if you know how to say it, good for you. And if you are the artist, well done. Pablo. This book is amazing and a beautiful example of what can be done through the medium of comics. Again, I focused primarily upon the formal aspects because I knew that I could do that part right, and because I knew I would be able to focus more on what I wanted to say by doing that. Again, the point of these videos is not merely to just sort of highlight, hey, I've read this book this week, or I've read this book this week. Because if it was, these videos would be a lot shorter and there would be a lot more of them. I really try to sit down and think about what books I want to cover on this channel because, again, I believe comics are art. And I believe that comics are worth people's time, whether they want to make comics, whether they just want to appreciate comics as a medium, or whether they just want to read great books. Pablo is all of that in a nutshell. Lovers of biography are going to find something really interesting, and I would probably argue very novel about the approach of using a graphic novel to tell a person's life story. Lovers of comics are probably going to appreciate it simply for the fact that this book is stunningly gorgeous, both in terms of its colors, its approach, as well as its general composition. And then in terms of lovers of fine art period, no art library should be complete without this book, if nothing for the fact that, again, far too often, the life stories of artists are these sort of romanticized, very superficial exercises that don't really dig into the life of an individual. Pablo takes well over, how many pages was it again? 342 pages to cover just about 4 or 5 years. That may not seem terribly important, but we have to remember again that we're talking about one of the most important artists of the 20th century and the early years of his life. Anybody, everybody should take the time to read Pablo. Either because you love Pablo Picasso, either because you love art history, either because you love biography, or hey, maybe you just need a great story. Pablo, I promise you, will have something to offer you. Okay, I'm going to call it a day there. Whew! Thank you so much for watching. I tremendously appreciate it. I hope you appreciate how much a labor of love this was, because I really wanted to talk about this book and how great it was, and I felt so bad yesterday after I made that crap video. So thank you for indulging me. Thank you for appreciating the fact that I didn't do a narrative. I promise the next book I do, I'll probably talk about that, or I'll make sure to do that like I normally do. But this book was unique. As always, please like, share, and subscribe, all that jazz. It makes me know that you're watching this, that you want to see more of these videos, and that you just like the channel, or that, hey, you need a laugh at my expense. Hey, I'm easy. Do whatever you got to do. Just a reminder, too, as always, I have a Patreon account, and I'm only charging $1 a month. The reason for that is simple. I'm not asking for much. Really, it's not going to require that much. If everybody who watches this video can just donate even $1 one time, I guarantee you it's going to help me afford comics and Wi-Fi, which is ultimately all I ever really need to make these videos anyway. And you're helping my art too. So please, please, please follow the link to the Patreon in the description section below. I'll also probably do my link tree. So, hey, if you want to see my paintings, if you think they might be at all interesting, check them out. Or don't. No pressure, no judgment. A little judgment. If you want to take a look at Pablo, of course, the first place I always recommend people to go is your local comic book shop. There's more and more comic book shops out there, especially with the way that the big two comic distributors have behaved more and more lately. There's more and more independent comics coming up on the scene trying to help retailers out, and more importantly, trying to make great comics, period. And Pablo is one of them. Now, again, it's Self-Made Hero Press, so they may not be as accessible as, say, like Sinestro Volume 1. But go to your local comic book shop. Ask them about it, because even if they don't have a copy of it, they may be able to order it for you. And if they can't help you out, don't forget, you have access to public libraries. Go in, ask them if they've got a graphic novel section, and check their catalog to see if they have Pablo. If they don't, they probably have an interlibrary loan system, in which case they can get it to you that way. Again, thank you so much for watching. I tremendously appreciate it. Go read some comics.